Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our FDP Contract Subcommittee session at the September meeting. My name is Janet Hannum Hayes, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the FDP Contracts Committee. On behalf of my fellow co-chairs, Katie Cook of Michigan State University and Missy Peluso of University of Pennsylvania, we want to say welcome to all of you. In today's session, we are planning to introduce you to several of the contract subcommittee members. Those members will be providing updates on the various working groups and demonstrations that the contract subcommittee have been working on the past little while. You will be introduced to each working group member shortly. Our goal for today's session is to, as I mentioned, discuss the topics that we are working on and the progress that has been made by each of the working groups. We're very interested in engaging the membership today to gauge your interests in some of the topics that we have been working on, and we want to discuss what else you all might be interested in. The working groups that will be sharing and updating information with you today includes the IT Security Clause and CCMC working group. And I will just say there that I'm actually going to provide a brief overview because we do not have a full working group, and we're certainly seeking volunteers for that group. You'll also hear from the Contract Subcommittee webpage redesign working group and the Troublesome Clause 2.0 reporting requirements working group. You'll hear from the Fundamental Research Model Language Memo working group. You will also hear from the State Requirements Flowdowns working group. And last but not least, the Federal Lab Review and Negotiation Techniques working group. So to start us off quickly, just a brief update on the IT Security Clause CCMC working group. I know you're all familiar with the regulations that are requiring that adequate controls be put in place in our respective research institutions. Many of the Big 10 institutions are having challenges dealing with this, as I'm sure many of you can appreciate and confirm. We're realizing, obviously, that compliance and IT offices need to be brought into these conversations. And so, as a committee, we believe that the IT security clauses and CCMC is an important topic to pursue. Right now, we're waiting to see what the federal government will do or what the feds are going to do. And so, again, I mentioned earlier, we don't have a working group formulated for that just yet, but we are certainly looking for interested volunteers. So if you are interested in volunteering for this particular working group, please reach out to us. At the end of the session, we are going to share our contact information, and we certainly encourage each and every one of you who are interested to participate and to volunteer for that group. So to that end, we're going to move now quickly to the Contracts Subcommittee webpage redesign working group. Before we do that, there is a polling question that we would like to ask you. And that polling question is, what are the other efforts that we have been focusing on from years back is that of the OTA demonstration. Many of you have expressed that your institutions are seeing a lot of the other transaction authority type mechanisms. And so our question today is, do you believe the OTA demonstration should be continued? Is there any interest in hearing more about that effort, or for the contracts group to work towards providing perhaps documentation and or strategies with dealing with that effort? Please, if you would, indicate your response in the poll and let us know.
We're going to close the poll in about 10 seconds, so please get in your responses.
All right, thank you, Sarah. All right, we move now to our second update, and this is coming from the Contracts Subcommittee webpage redesign working group. That group actually consists of myself and Katie Cook, my fellow co-chair. So to that end, Katie, take it away.
Thanks, Jana. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to kind of briefly chat regarding the contract subcommittee webpage that is on the FDP site. So Janet and I have been taking a look at it. We have updated a few things, tried to remove some outdated information. There's still more outdated information on there. And so it's a little bit of a work in progress. Kind of the goals of our work group is, to modernize the user interface. We're going to be working with Sarah. I know that's one of the things Sarah's also kind of working on behind the scenes for all of FDP, utilizing the new FDP template that has come out for regarding the web pages. But the key is really looking at the information and materials that are on there and what is being shown. And so one of the things that we are going to probably be doing here, you'll probably either see later this week or more so probably next week, is sending out a thought exchange, the S2 questions. One is, what pre-existing tools could we, that people would be willing to donate, that we could post on our website that might be interesting and could help with contract review, et cetera, or resources for the contract community. And then, of course, what types of interests do we have in development of new tools or things that people wish they had? And so it's kind of a two-part question, and we're just trying to kind of get insight and input of what FDP membership is looking for resources for the web page. So food for thought. And so we're hoping we, when you get that link next week, that you'll be willing to kind of share your thoughts and provide any tools or insight that you have on it. It'd be very useful while we do this in the next 6 months or so. So I am going to, Sarah, you can go ahead and go to the next work group. I'm going to pass it off to the Troublesome Clauses 2.0 work group to Missy. Hello.
Hey, thanks, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to take just a minute before we go back to troublesome clauses, because I've had some private chat going on around OTAs. So I want to make sure that everybody understands what they are. And then, Sarah, maybe we can reopen the poll question for 1 hot minute. So OTAs are agreements done by other transaction. And as a reminder, we've seen them often in DARPA, sometimes in NIH, and there's some new NIH solicitations that will also be other transactions. And the way these other transactions work is they are contracts with federal agencies that are not subject to the FAR or the DFAR, so that they were meant to be mechanisms to allow for flexible and quick contracting. And some of the issues that we sometimes see in them is that they will have clauses that are similar to FAR clauses, but not quite exactly the same. And that can be difficult for institutions to figure out how to comply with, or if they can comply with them at all. A second pretty big problem with OTs can be that they are not necessarily subject to by-dole. And so what this means is for intellectual property interests, the institution may not have the normal rights to ownership and commercialization of intellectual property that we is created under these other transaction agreements that we come to expect as normal course of business in federal contracting. And I'm going to call a participant out. Alex, did I miss anything that I should have put in there?
No, I think you hit it nail on the head.
Great, thank you. So Sarah, can we go back just really quick and do that OTA question again? Can we relaunch it? Because we don't think that there were really 48% unsure. So I'm sorry to bug people, but if we can do that really quickly once again. And while that is running, I'm going to continue to talk about the troublesome clauses. So you guys may recall that sometime last year, I talked to you guys about troublesome clauses and that we were putting together some information to put together a new database. We have made some significant progress on that in terms of what we might like that database to look like. And when I would talk to you last time, we talked some, I believe, about the process, and we can just leave it on. Thank you. Can you go back one slide, please, Sarah? Sorry, I don't know who's moving my slides back and forth. Thank you. So we talked somewhat about what features people might want in a database, who would have access to it. And now we've moved on to talk about reporting. So can we go to the next slide, please? So just to recall, the purpose was to replace the existing Troublesome Clauses 2.0 database with something that's searchable, dynamic, and feels like it's 2022, now 2023 coming up, and not 1999 anymore as we deal with it. So what we've done is we developed use cases, so for both member access and perhaps non-member access to this, and developed basic workflow for data collection, including definitions within the system. So what we were thinking was an institution would be able to enter their own data. There would be an institutional point of contact who was the central administrator who could administer. Who else from their institution had the ability to input data in there? So these would all be under login features. There'd be the ability to search to see if a clause already existed, if it wasn't there, to add new ones, to review active accounts. And then in terms of entering a new clause, we were really looking for the funding agency. What kind of instrument was it? Is it a grant or a contract? Is it a subcontract? What kind of prime does it have? Specific clauses, why it's the specific clause is troublesome. The reason for the concern, the negotiation strategy that you've taken to try to deal with the troublesome clause, if that was successful or not, and how much time it took you to get to that point in the negotiation. And on that outcome, it may be that the institution walked away, or it may be that the institution was successful in negotiating, and that might be a strategy for another institution moving forward. Next slide, please.
Ever walk away?
Well, we've got our polling question in between. So there we go. So 71% of people are now saying that yes, these are still an issue. We still have our 5% no's, and many fewer unsures about them. So that's great. If we have some time at the end, we can talk a little bit about where we might next go with OTAs and where we're going. Thank you, Sarah. So we've We've also, since the last time we met, planned reporting capabilities by prime sponsor, by pass-through entities. We're thinking that OTAs may be a subdivision of clauses within the troublesome clause database, because it may be a specific clause that's appearing in an OTA, allowing for people to search by what's been submitted by their institution. And then we've been talking about file formats for downloading, whether it's an Excel file or CSVs or whatever it is, to try to make it so that institutions can use the data once they have it available. And one of the things that we've really been thinking about with members versus non-members is that non-members may have this be a public-facing website or website on this. So non-members may be able to go in and look at what a troublesome clause is, perhaps without institutional identification of who entered the clause, but they wouldn't be able to download the data. The downloads of the data would be available to FDP members only. So that's kind of where we were on that so far. And then a number of sorting options within the database, but also, since the file is downloadable, people can then manipulate the file in whichever way that they would like to on that. And may I have the next slide, please? So kind of where are we and what's next? So we've had this queued up for a few months for a developer. So we're in waiting mode now for resources to become available to help us get the translate the essentially the documentation plans into reality. So if this is something you have particular expertise in and lots of free time, let us know. If it's something you have expertise in and no free time but would like to provide advice, let us know. We are looking for more volunteers on this. And another big one will be, we will be looking for volunteers as we start to get the database up, to go in and be testers and make sure that the system's working the way that we want it to be working. And I've seen there's a bunch of questions coming into the chat. No, this database is sadly not available at the moment. And I think that was the only one on this that's really waiting at this second. So happy to take other questions about Troublesome Clauses 2.0, but for now, I think we're going to move on to the next working group. So Andrea, I'm going to turn this over to you to talk about fundamental research model language. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Missy. So we're going to talk a little bit about developing a memo, model memo to use to request fundamental research determination from the government sponsor on a contract or subcontract. And I'm working on this with Colin Rich at the University of Alabama and Bill Scholler at UVA. Sarah, the first slide, please. On a contract, technically with the DFARS 7000 clause, we do need to have the determination from the government, but also on OTAs, for compliance purposes, most of our export control officers will also want to have that, even though the DFARS clause isn't going to be in an OTA. So ideally, we will have that determination from the government. The goal of our working group is to develop a model memo for our institutions to communicate to the sponsor that request to have that determination written out for our compliance officers. What we've been working on is figuring out the best time to make this request. Not all of our sponsors, both at the prime contract level or the subcontract level, understand the request or why it's important to us. And so we've been trying to figure out the best format and timing of this request. We think that consistent language and consistent formatting can make this process easier and faster. Sarah, the next slide, please. So depending on the sponsor agency, type of project, funding instrument, we thought that institutions might have different preferences on format and timing of the request. So instead of just coming up with one memo template, we thought that we could provide 3 options for institutions. So the first option would be to incorporate the fundamental research determination request into a proposal cover letter, which is my own personal preference, so that the government sponsor or the subcontract pass-through entity sponsor has all of the information about the project with the determination request all together. We also typically recommend that that determination request appear somewhere else in the proposal. The second option would be that the request be sent separately from a proposal cover letter, but at the proposal stage. And the third option would be that the request be sent to a pass-through entity upon notification of an award likely containing restrictions. So we've been working on developing 3 separate templates for the determination request, all sort of containing the same information, but in different formats, so that institutions could pick and choose whatever works best, or individuals at different institutions can pick and choose depending on what works best within their processes and policies. Next slide, please. So we're just going to continue to refine these templates. We've been working on this with our contracts subcommittee members, and we've gotten some really great input. A lot of that input has focused on trying to make sure these don't get too outdated with specific clause references, because so much changes so quickly. So we're going to continue to refine and share with our fellow subcommittee members. And then we'll look forward toward a pilot with timing and scope to be determined. And we will love feedback. Next slide, please. And here's our contact information. If you have any thoughts on this topic, we're always happy to take feedback, input, and additional volunteers. And that's it. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Eason, and I am representing the State Requirement Flowdowns Work Group. Dina Rose Wilson at the University of South Florida is also currently serving with the work group, and we welcome others of you if you're interested. We'd like to have more participation, and especially from more different states. Next slide, please. So we've got a polling question. Has your institution had to walk away from a contract or a sub-award because you were not able to agree to, due to state laws or regulations, you were not able to accept? Has everybody had enough time to respond? Next slide, please. Okay, so for several of you, the answer is no. Can we do that again and keep the data separately, and only those of you who are at state institutions respond? We probably should have included a question to also ask if you were at a state institution. Can we back up and repeat the poll, but this time we want to keep the answers on the first one, but if only those of you at state institutions or public institutions will respond, I'd like to get data on that, please, also. Okay, thank you. So what we're focused on, so it's a little bit different. It's even between yes and no and unsure. Okay, thank you. So what our work group is working to do is to evaluate identified state laws that can be problematic, review and discuss negotiation strategies, and coordinate with the Troublesome Clauses 2.0 reporting requirements work group, because there's a good bit of overlap. The troublesome clauses often are based on state law issues. But what we would like to ask you to do is, you'll see our contact information in a minute. Send us examples of issues that come up in your state with your state laws. I know I'm in Georgia, Georgia Tech, and Georgia has some things, even the way its Open Records Act operates, that are unique to Georgia. But more importantly, we have a constitutional prohibition against pledging the credit of the state, and court decisions and official attorney general opinions, state attorney general opinions, interpreting that to prohibit a wide range of things. And that's unique to Georgia in some instances. We often encounter sponsors who don't understand why Georgia can't do something that another state agreed to, or we encounter it. So we're interested in seeing the variations on that, and the more information you can provide on what it is that your state says that's causing the issues. It would be interesting to kind of group these and compare. And we're hoping to come up with negotiation strategies for some of these things that we encounter a lot. And we also welcome any questions you have, as well as your participation. Next slide, please. So that's my contact information. And if you'll just reach out with those questions and issues and comparison information, we would appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Hi, afternoon, everyone. Bill Schulwer here, and I'm going to discuss on our work group focused on federally funded research and development, review and negotiation techniques. And so myself with my other colleagues listed below there have created the work group basically to focus on the unique interactions that we see with FFRDCs and the way that they are structured, leading to challenges when it comes to negotiating some of the terms. Next slide, please. So the background on interacting with FFRDCs, a little bit of context. So these are federally funded research and development centers that are centers that are operated by a non-federal entity, whether that's a university, nonprofit, or industry. And frequently universities will enter into contracts with them to either do research at the university or sometimes at the actual physical location of the FFRDC. And the way that they are structured and organized leads to those challenges. So a lot of times you see instances where the terms, the university is required to accept or redline any terms and conditions at the proposal stage. A lot of times there's pre-canned terms that they have generated that they use on a repeated basis. And if you do encounter instances where you're looking to negotiate certain terms, you'll find that there's basically multiple layers that you're working through, from the non-federal entity, the subcontracting representative, and they then have to go talk to their in-house counsel or leadership, and then they may need to talk to the federal sponsoring agencies, contracting officer, or legal counsel. And as a result, you can end up with some very protracted negotiations. And in addition, a lot of times when you do have a lot of interactions with these FFRDCs, you have very repeated interactions. And so the first time you enter into a contract, there's a lot of pressure to accept all of those terms essentially as is from the first time for any subsequent contract. And so from an FDP perspective, we thought that there was some value both in terms of demystifying the process that's associated with both proposing and accepting terms from an FFRDC, but then kind of more at a granular level, looking at instances where specific universities have been able to work around some of the challenging issues that we've encountered in some of their contractual terms and conditions. And so, next slide, please. So from the beginning, we started basically focused on Department of Energy funded FFRDCs. If you go on, NSF compiles the list of all of the federally funded FFRDCs. And I think from my experience, we certainly could expand this to some DoD funded ones. There are obviously other federal sponsoring agencies, but just from a practical matter, we decided to start gathering data from our member institutions in the work group that have had interactions with the Department of Energy funded FFRDCs. And we tried to narrow that to look at some of the listed issues that are on the slide there, some of which are either sort of hot topic subjects right now or things that we've encountered frequently in our many repeated interactions on FFRDC contracts. So for national participation, the applicability and flow down for any of the FAR or agency supplement DEAR clauses that are coming down from the operating agent, the operating management company, from their prime contract that are flowing into the university subcontract. Export control issues, prior notice language that's asking the FFRDC to identify when there are export control information being disclosed. That sort of dovetails with publication and fundamental research language. State law related issues for member institutions that are state institutions. Certainly you can encounter issues where the FFRDC is incorporating terms that are problematic for a state institution, as well as some other sort of topics that came up as we were going through and looking at our contracts with these different DOE funded FFRDCs. Next slide, please. So in terms of what are examples of when we went through, we basically had each of the member institutions go through and kind of do a survey of, okay, look over your contracts with this list of FFRDCs in these topic areas. We kind of left that other in case there were some instances that people found other areas of interest as we kind of dug into the data. And these are just a few examples of some of the successes, if you will, that we were able to document from Fermi and Los Alamos, where there was a revision to narrow the publication clause that would be much more in line with what many of our member institutions would expect as far as the scope of review for publication, not being as broad as originally drafted. Silence on federal court jurisdiction for Thomas Jefferson National Accelerator Facility, a narrowing of or a more traditional prior notice requirement for export control issues with Sandia, and then some more, I guess, rigorous self-deletion language that emphasizes some of the criteria by which something is not applicable to the subcontract, that can give the member institution a lot better assurances that clauses that are problematic for the member institution, that shouldn't be applicable based on the type of work and the type of contract, are in fact not applicable. So these are some of the examples that we've encountered as we've started to dig into the data. Next slide, please. So in terms of next steps and where we're hoping to take this, we definitely need to continue gathering some more data as far as what our institutions have encountered, and we absolutely are interested if other institutions are willing to join and offer some information in terms of their successes on contracting. As we go through that process, I think the hope is to develop some general guidance document about some of the pitfalls of contracting with FFRDCs, and along with that, a more detail leveled by FFRDC and by topic area, certain areas where there's been successes on the negotiation side, not all that different than the troublesome clauses concept, but just much more focused on the FFRDC interaction. Next slide, please. So like I said, if anyone's interested in providing some feedback or some details about their interactions, please contact us. And that's all I have. I believe we are opening up for questions next.
Yes, thanks, Bill. So yes, we wanted to just quickly open up for all the work groups. Any questions, discussions, or things that you guys would like to talk about? You're welcome to unmute yourself or raise your hand, whatever works best.
So Katie, we had one comment in here already. It was to me directly from Alex around wouldn't it be useful to have OTAs as a category in the Troublesome Clauses 2.0? And I think that's a definite yes, but I think there's a lot of other things beyond just the Troublesome Clauses database that the work group can do to develop tools and tricks to help people through the negotiation process. Bill, did you want to comment on that?
Sorry, in terms of the troublesome clauses or the?
I've using the troublesome clauses as a entry point to get data on issues with FFRDCs.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said OTA. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of right now, if it's just a matter of scope, and as we gather the data, they're sort of both running in parallel. And I think if troublesome clauses kind of develops the infrastructure to handle that, then that would be great to add in. I just think at the moment, our kind of central focus is more getting the data in place, and then if in the future, we could put that in there, I think that would be great. But there's definitely value in having the data independent of that in and of itself.
Any other questions or comments? Sarah's going to take the slide down. so people can turn on their cameras and we can see each other and actually have a discussion. And it shouldn't just be Katie and Janet and I. We talk to each other once a week or so. All right. So I can do a show of hands polling, little poll here. How many people attended the session that Mike and Sarah did on OTAs? I don't remember which meeting it was. It was last year at some point, where they talked about the white paper that they had been working on.
Missy, do you mean at FDP or
At
in chorus?
FDP. At FDP, it was an FDP session from this group.
Oh, wasn't that more than a year ago, or is my time?
Well, time, you know, I can't tell time in COVID times, Alex.
Yeah, me neither.
I'm seeing a few hands there.
Mhm.
So one thing that we're working on is, when we're thinking about the OTAs, is getting that draft finalized and into a document that can be up on the website to be helpful. With other OTA things, any other suggestions that people would like to see around OTAs or OTs?
I'm curious, as Missy poses that question, how many of you, by show of hands, are seeing these OTA mechanisms? And in what format are they coming in? Are they directly from the agency? Are they through various different middleman type sources? We're very curious to hear the various methods, if you will. Okay. Okay.
So Jeanette, this is Alex. One of the things that I'm finding is two different scenarios, and I think that Mike and Sarah addressed both. Problematic are just the basic OTAs because of the ambiguity of like what regulations apply and how do you manage it, how do you flow them down. They say it gives them more flexibility, but from a burden standpoint, when we're talking about FDP, everybody that's ever embraced a FAR, the reason why we like it is that there's prescriptions and it's much easier to argue whether it applies or not. So it opens you up to, you know, negotiating like you'd have to negotiate with a private company. So that's one aspect. And I think FDP could really use, if we could work with our federal partners. I think part of the study when we were looking at it was that the increase through certain institutes and the President's Management Fund at NIH is where they're really proliferating, as well as in certain DoD agencies and Navy, for instance. So that would be something that we could really look at is, you know, once we get the white paper out, how can we work with our federal partners to try to get some more clarity on either let's use why do you have to have different templates? Or if you do need different templates, then let's have some interpretation of how it applies and how it needs to be flowed down. So we have some sort of reference document. The second part that we see, particularly through our School of Engineering, are the consortia. So a lot of these consortia that have really difficult terms because they're listed as, you know, their IP policy that they created or their membership policy. So we're presented with all these documents that appear that they're non-negotiable because some committee has created them a year ago, and they're all funded by OTs. Many of them are, at least. And so, and it's one of those situations that if you have to do it, you have to accept it, or you don't get to work in that particular area that's almost like cornered the market in certain areas of research. So I think that's almost a different topic, but they are funded by OTs, and that causes a lot of issues, at least at Johns Hopkins and from when I've talked to some of my colleagues around the country.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Alex. That's exactly what we are wanting to hear. And I will tell you, just from the preliminary discussions we've had amongst the subcommittee in and of itself, that's exactly what many of our institutions are seeing. Those two big buckets, if you will. So thank you. Definitely areas that we can focus on. I see lots of hands now. Stephanie, let's start with you. I see your hand up. Do you have a question? Okay. Andrea, is that a question or is your?
No, sorry.
No worries, no worries.
So Alex, I'll make a comment in response to kind of what you're seeing, and it's like negotiating a contract. I think one of the issues is that institutions would take comfort in knowing where they can negotiate and where they can't on these, and that Hopkins isn't getting a way better deal than Penn, just to use us, just because you're a better negotiator than I am, right? That there would be some comfort around that. I know Coker is taking this up quietly with NIH around future OTs that they may be doing, around trying to get some clarity, both in terms of the BAA or funding announcement, that it will be other transactions, that what the requirements will be around that, and try to at least give some clarity to institutions going in, that they know that what they'll be dealing with around that. And then exactly that, those kinds of issues like will buy, don't apply, and trying to get that information up front to make it slightly easier to negotiate.
So I have another question, if nobody else does, about the FFRDC. Of course I do, right? So is the troublesome clauses going to incorporate not just the FFRDC, but all types of agreements, or like what is the like, I think the FFRDC is going to be interesting. And years ago, old timer talking here, we actually, DOE was one of our members, and we had a really great advocate at DOE that helped us with FFRDC agreements, as well as the federal labs that we worked with. So my first question is the troublesome clauses going to gradually bring in, is it going to be flexible enough to bring these sorts of different types of agreements that come in? That's, I guess, for Missy. And then for the FFRDC, for Bill and others, is this FFRDC in some way going to help people with working with federal labs? Because I know that's been a common kind of complaint or struggle for universities as well.
Yeah, so Alex, in answering the first one, I'll say absolutely. I think the whole point of this redesign is that the system is flexible enough to accept whatever's troublesome at any point in time, and to change and morph with whatever the hot topic issues are or the troublesome clauses are at any moment in time. So there'll be a pull down menu that has, here's this agency, or here's this thing, or here's what the funding mechanism is. But everything will have an other, and we'll have an administrator. So I don't know if there's 3 OTs in a row. The OT is now all of a sudden not an other, OT is a category.
Got it. What's really sad is that the categories that are in there are the same ones that were in there 14 years ago too. So yeah, they never go away. You just add new ones, right?
Well, sometimes we get clarity on them, and we learn that we either have to live with them or let it go.
Yeah.
Bill, did you want to take the second half of that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we first started looking at the landscape, and particularly when we were talking about DOE and relative to like federal labs, like NETL as a federal lab that's operated by the feds as opposed to a non-federal entity, that came up as like an area where a lot of member institutions have had issues in the past. And so I think what ideally we could expand to encompass that sort of thing once we get a handle on, and I think the area where it differs slightly from troublesome clause is that, at least the way we've been thinking about it, is like the FFRDC is a little bit more holistic, in the sense that in so many instances with the FFRDCs, you just have like a pre-canned set of terms and conditions that are publicly available that you go and can look at on their website a lot of times. And so the resource ideally would be, you're, as a member institution, you're sort of armed with some knowledge about what kind of pitfalls you might expect at XYZ FFRDC that you possibly don't get on like a troublesome clause that's much more a one-off clause basis. But I think in general, there's also like, there's so much crossover in terms of some of the issues that are going to be tracked in the troublesome clause database that I think ideally that, you know, they can both sort of coexist and both add value. I should also mention, I think I might have skipped over this on my slides, but there was also there's sort of been some communication with the subawards team work group on some of the issues that they're focused on as that's primarily related to the issuance of outgoing subs to federal labs, to FFRDCs and some of those challenges. So we, you know, I think as we get our handle on kind of the topic and how to demystify the interaction with these entities, that there'll be greater opportunities for some collaboration on some of the work that group is doing, particularly with, you know, the issuance of an outgoing sub to either a federal lab or an FFRDC.
This is Elizabeth Eason speaking just as a participant here in this session, not on behalf of the State Clauses Committee. I'm interested in seeing as much information as possible on the various consortium agreements, because we're dealing with a lot of NSF consortia, but also some that are OTAs and then some that are nonprofits in the space. And they're telling us that all these other universities have agreed. And sometimes we're finding out directly from the university that that's not the case. So I would like to see maybe a drop down or some kind of additional focus on all these consortium agreements, which seem to be a really hot topic right now for us. Because like Alexandra said, they often contain these clauses that we're being told were negotiated a year ago and can't be changed, but we're finding are overreaching in terms of IP and other things frequently.
Thank you. Kevin's been waiting very patiently with his hand up. Kevin, you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, I mean, I was just going to say great presentation, and then there's a whole bunch of topics there that we're also going to be reiterating at the subawards subcommittee session, whether that's seeking volunteers from the subawards community to participate in these efforts, or just mentioning sort of like the joint working groups or the subaward component to things like outgoing funds to FFRDCs or subawards under other transactions, and what templates we can offer and what changes we can make, what we can put in our subawards FAQs to help guide people. But I did see that point on Bill's slide. I appreciate that. We'll be echoing what you're doing. We have a couple comments tomorrow's session at 11 a.m. Eastern. And we also have a slide on state law flow down and complications resulting from that under subawards. So we were going to revisit that briefly at tomorrow's session. I know there's a lot of overlap between the attendees here and who's going to attend tomorrow, but maybe not 100%. So I just, yeah, the work you're doing on OTAs, FFRDCs and state law, just very interested and happy to, you know, join forces where we can on the subawards subcommittee as well.
Great. So everybody think about what your really hard questions are and ask them of Kevin tomorrow.
Thanks, Kevin. We appreciate that. And yes, we overlap often. So I think that's great that we can work together on those items.
Agreed. And just to reiterate, you know, when we started the earlier part of the presentation, we are very, very serious about soliciting volunteers here. If you all are interested in any of the working groups that we presented today, in particular, the IT security group, if you are encountering or working on efforts at your institutions and have information to share, please do consider volunteering for that group.
Well, I guess there's nothing else, Janet, Katie, did you have any final?
No, thank you so much everybody for attending. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul, for coming this afternoon.
Mhm.
Everybody have a good one.
A good one. Bye-bye.